Well, you might remember the 496 from the garage when we tore it down. It looks a little bit different right now. First of all, it's about 50 cubes bigger. But the difference is that the motor was completely degreased and cleaned. It was a line bored, a line honed, decked to square. One of the things that you have to remember is when you say decking a motor, this motor has been decked. In other words, this surface has been cut, but it's a deck to square, basically meaning in relationship to the center line of the crankshaft and in relationship to the other deck surface. Both decks are the exact same height, so that the pistons are the distance from the top of the deck to the piston is exactly the same on both sides. These are things that we do to racing engines, but we like to do them to really good street engines too, because the more perfect and precise everything is, the better the engine is going to be for the long haul. Lunati supplied us with a beautiful crank and a set of H-beam rods. The rods are just gorgeous. Everything came to us that looked really nice. We elected to go with a set of JE pistons just because we wanted a certain compression ratio and a certain shaped dome. If you look at that dome, it's gorgeous and it fits inside the dome of that head real nice. The compression ratio, it's right around 10-to-1. It's a pump gas engine. I mean, let's be honest. You want to be able to stick 93 octane in it. You don't want to be going and putting in an additive or racing gas in your cruiser, especially a convertible cruiser. The other thing we did is we balanced the motor. We like to balance things very precise because we don't want this guy to be driving his car and complaining about a vibration down the road. It also makes everything last a lot longer. Degreeing the cam, we have a link on the site that you can look it up yourself. But I could tell you this, if there was one thing you wanted to pay for in an engine building or an engine rebuilding job, I would say I'd want my machine shop to put the pistons in it and degree the cam. Those are things that are that's money well spent. That way you won't worry about, well, you won't worry about screwing up. The rings get fitted perfectly, everything's done correctly. You make sure that everything's torqued right. Not to say that everybody can't do it at home. There's certain things you just want peace of mind on, and that's probably one of the better ideas. So what we have is we have Fast Times' this street, really good street version of a motor here. And the next step obviously would be to start screwing the rest of the pieces onto it.
It's full of performance parts from Holley, Lunati, ARP, MSD, and pretty much anything that you can order through your Summit catalog that comes in the mail.
Now, a good example of why I suggest that paying somebody to put together your short block is money well spent is because this is a 4 1/4 stroke. This stroke never came in a Chevy engine. So you're essentially swinging your connecting rods way more than they were ever meant to be swung inside of a 454 block. That tends to give you a little bit of clearance issues. When this happens, the inexperienced builder may not know where to clearance their motor. What we found out is we had to clearance it in a couple spots. And you could see by the grinding that we did in that area, had we not done it, the connecting rods would have been whacking the bottom of the cylinders in that area. This is key. This is money well spent paying a professional to do it. If you don't want to run into that problem, build a 454. That's easy. But now, why did we build a 496? Why is it a 4 1/4 stroke? Because the expression is there is no substitute for cubic inches. And you just put yourself 50 more cubes in the motor. If you make 1 lousy horsepower per cube, it's another 50 horsepower. That's a lot. I mean, think about it from that perspective. This motor will perform great. I mean, if you think about it, if you had a bone stock 454 and a bone stock 496, the 496 in essence should win. So, and since we like winning, that's why we decided to go this route.
The heads that we chose for the 496 are the Holley oval port big block Chevy heads. Out of the box, they're great. They're probably good for anything up to about 450 cubic inches, but since this is going to be a little bit bigger engine and something that we're looking for power for, we did a little bit of work to them. Basically, if you look at the cylinder head, you can see that work has been done in certain areas, such as the intake port here, where it's polished, from the entrance all the way about an inch inside the port. Basically, what we did here is we port matched the cylinder head to the intake manifold gasket, which is then transferred to the intake manifold in order to be able to port match everything, so it's one continuous port from the plenum area of the intake manifold all the way into the runner. When you flow test the cylinder head, what you're doing is trying to see how much air the cylinder head can actually move through the port and through the valve that you have. And it's not just the cylinder head you need to look at when you're porting. You really need to take a look at the entire induction system, such as the intake manifold. When we flow cylinder heads for a competition engine, we actually have the intake manifold bolted to the intake face here, so that air is being flowed through the port that the engine's going to run with going down the track, or around the track, so it actually sees the air turbulence and the way that the air is going to flow through the intake in order to be able to make it a more realistic number. With the head flipped over, we can see both bowl areas of the intake and the exhaust here, and the chamber, and you can kind of get an idea of what's been machined and what hasn't in the chamber here. Just like on the exhaust, you can see where it's been machined on this side, and right here you can see where I did some work in the chamber as well as up here. This is, of course, your intake valve seat, and you can see right here where I've made some markings. You can see this actually has a 4-angle valve job. Now, most people don't consider the angles in here where this mark is and this angle out here to be beneficial, but we've actually done some work and seen that it does make a difference in the way that the air moves through the intake runner and through the chamber. We have one of our cylinder heads here on the flow bench, and we're actually going to flow this intake port, but you can see a couple things that are out of the ordinary on the cylinder head here. We have clay around the intake port, and what we do here is we put clay around the port to soften the air coming around into the port. Normally we would use a test plate such as one of these, but since we don't have a plate made that is the same size as these ports, we actually have to use clay. Clay is used on a lot of flow tests, so if you ever see with clay or with a pipe such as this right here, this is used for the exhaust. That's what that's for. Now, we also have a micrometer here set up so that it opens the valve just by turning the dial here, and it opens the valve to a certain amount, so you can actually see exactly how much the valve is open to give you a more accurate reading. Here at Fast Times, we have different fixtures that bolt to the bench, such as this one here. It has different bore sizes to mimic the size of the cylinder in the engine. So if you have an engine that has a 4-inch bore, you don't want to use something such as this size that's 4/700. It's going to give you an inaccurate flow reading, and it'll actually inflate the numbers, which a lot of people do. A lot of the fly-by-night companies out there on the internet that are selling cylinder heads that flow a lot of air usually do tricks such as that, or they leave a spark plug out of that cylinder head so it flows more air even though it's not. Basically, when you get the cylinder head set up on the bench here, you want to pick the flow range that you're going to flow into. Here we have above and below 150 and the flow direction, whether it's the intake or the exhaust. Since we're flowing above 150 CFM and the intake port, we're going to set it up for that. You also have a flow range down here that you set it, and we're picking the number 5 range. If you look up here, you have a number that flow range can flow. So we're at the number 5 on the intake, and we're flowing up to 444 CFM. This head flows 330 through the intake, so we're well within the range. Okay, now that we've flowed our cylinder head, you can see that we have some numbers written down here, and you're probably wondering what in the world this means. Basically, to get to this 305 CFM number, what we've looked at is this calculation right here. We have our flow CFM, which is 305.4, equals the percentage of flow, 0.69, times the scale value. Now, since the scale value is 444, it's flowed at 25 inches of water, which is what you saw over here on the manometer. To get to 28 inches is what we flowed at, we have to multiply it by 0.997. So we take our flow scale value of 444 times 0.997 times the 69% on the scale, comes up with 305.4.